Hey y'all, it's Blake Mitchell. Welcome back to another episode of Let's Not Circle Back. I'm joined today by my partner and friend, Dr. Patrice Palmer, and we are excited to talk to you about our experience at the Out and Equal Workplace Summit. We had the opportunity to attend in October in Seattle. For those of you not familiar with the Out and Equal Summit, it's the largest gathering of LGBTQ and allied professionals and is really a space to think about how to continue to grow workplaces of belonging, especially for LGBTQ identified individuals. I really felt at the conference there was a focus on how to grow belonging across all facets of identity, and there was a huge focus on welcoming allies in as well. In terms of the folks who attended, it is a lot of employee resource group leaders, I would say, is probably the primary group, but also HR professionals, talent folks, leaders, executive sponsors, and we also heard from a lot of activists, nonprofit leaders, and changemakers who are doing work in and outside of the corporate space. It's been around for about 3 decades, and we were fortunate enough to get to present this year, which was a really cool opportunity. If you've not listened to, oh, yeah, Patrice has their badge there. For those of you watching on video, that has the speaker or presenter label on it. So we were official presenters
Yes.
this year. Our presentation and go through the presentation we gave around employee resource groups. I encourage you to check that out. But today, we wanted to just take a few moments to share a few of our brief takeaways for those of you who were not able to attend or might just be curious about what is the tone right now at these types of events and what are the things that people are talking about. I would say to start, Patrice, just briefly, what did the conference feel like for you? And at the summit, what was your feeling around just the general tone and sentiment of the people that you were speaking with or hearing from?
I would say the general tone was gratefulness. People were grateful to be in community with each other. They were excited to see each other. It had been a couple of years since the conference had been able to meet in person, given COVID and all these other restrictions. And so it was awesome to have that. But I think we would be remiss in not also talking about some of the grief of what used to be and how large it once was and what they got to do before, and knowing that things have changed. So for me, those were two, but they really complemented each other, if I can use that term, because it was just as much gratefulness as there was times where folks were just like, whoa, this is heavy. And I just needed to be slightly separated from it for a little bit in order to be in community with people who get it. And so that's what I got from it.
Absolutely. I think that I realize perhaps like I take for granted often the myriad of places personally and professionally that I'm plugged into really robust queer community. I love that we get to work together and have such a strong queer siblinghood that we share, which really fills my cup every day. I, for those who don't know, also work part time in an LGBT nonprofit. I'm a drag performer. So there's a lot of elements of my life where I'm really deeply rooted in queer community. And I feel a sense from a lot of folks there that they don't feel that often, or that they're at organizations where they feel a bit more isolated or they're not able to show up fully as themselves. And now there's a much more resistance to them running programs and doing things, especially in the LGBTQ employee resource groups. And so I felt a lot of seeking of more knowledge and information about how to move forward, really wanting that connection, and a lot of gratitude about being able to access the space and be in community with so many other leaders and like-minded folks who are passionate about building belonging within their organizations. So it was really special to get to be a part of, and I think especially meaningful for me, dare I say, for us to get to present and be a part of sharing some of that information and give some encouragement to these ERG leaders. Patrice, what is your first sort of key takeaway or bit of wisdom, pearl of wisdom that you'd want to share with our listeners that you took away from the week that we had in Seattle?
Okay, I'm going to give my Mary Lou pearl of wisdom
You
in
caught it.
that.
You brought the pearl there. I love that. Yep. I threw in my drag name.
So, one, we had Professor Kenji Yoshina, who is an NYU constitutional law professor, who was there. And I was just taken back by what he provided us. And so, a couple of things that really stood out to me that he specifically talked about, and that was moving from cohort to context. And so, we're so used to having kind of these small groups, even in our ERGs, and the full capacity of what we do and capability of what we do is in the context of what we're doing. And he talks about sharing that context with people because it brings people in and it brings more people in than you would even think of because they're only thinking about it from one perspective. Queer people are intersectional. Black, we come from different racial groups, ethnic groups, religious affiliations, different orientations, and the way that we see ourselves. We are a very eclectic group of people. And so a lot of times when you kind of just mirror it LGBTQ, people only think it's in one context and does not have all of these other different elements. And so he kind of talked about how to bring context back to bring more people in. And the other thing that he also talked about is just providing people with an understanding of how to do this type of work. So oftentimes we talk about this work as either be strategic or be inspirational in what we provide. And really what he said is that you actually have to have an and in there. It needs to be both inspirational and strategic in order to provide tactical and practical solutions. And of course, all the work they are doing and continue to do with us as folks who were participating with policy and law, that to me was just amazing. And I got to sit into some really, really great conversations around what does policy say and really what does the law say. And we need to also still be very aware of what that is and how that shows up in our policy. So it was amazing. And I really nerded out on several of the sessions.
I agree. It's time for tactics and policy that
Mhm.
not only do we need to be very thoughtful about our moves and the steps that we take, but people are really seeking that, right? It's important to hold space and own the frustration and the uncertainty. I hope many of us are already sort of building a resilience to that because we're hit with a barrage of it all day, every day, especially if you're doing this work in organizations, whether it be corporate, nonprofit, or otherwise, giving people tactical steps and things that they can do and move with. And a plan is really important. And I think for our listeners, like for those of you overseeing teams or managing, like that piece is really helpful to give them as much direction and guidance as you can, that we need to be thoughtful about that, not just from a how do we move things forward, but how do we assuage like some of the frustration and uncertainty that exists. So I also really enjoyed his talks. There are a myriad of places where this work needs to get done, and companies are just one of those places, right? And so while the focus of this conference was much more corporate space, it's important to think about all of the different levers of change and influence that exist in our society, and how do we put our efforts, time, resources, and money to many different areas that are going to help move things in the best direction. I think there is so much importance in creating belonging within a company, influencing strategy and policy within these companies that have a lot of power and money to be on the positive end of change and including folks, right? But I think it's also important to say what voices or experiences are not represented in those companies. And oftentimes, those are the people, especially within the LGBTQ community, who are the most marginalized and impacted by policy and shifts in culture and federal regulation. So I think, namely in this case, I would say queer and trans people of color and LGBTQ youth are disproportionately impacted in the LGBT community in this moment. And many of those people, especially young people who aren't even in the working world, are not in these companies and benefiting always from these policies or things. And so while I was really heartened to see people really galvanized around it's time to make changes. It's time, like we are resilient, we are pushing forward and moving along. I hope that a lot of that energy is also translated into other places, and that people with the time and resources they have find ways to plug into other places and causes that help move that forward. And people were donating in the room even and doing company matches, right? So it's like, how do we get that energy and passion and bring a lot of these smaller groups that really need that support, that are helping uplift some of the more marginalized voices? And I think these summits are a really incredible place to do that, because you do have a lot of often more affluent LGBTQ individuals who have access to resources. And so I think my takeaway there was like, this is awesome. Let's direct this energy not just in our companies, but other places as well. And think about, again, those voices that are not in those rooms, that need our support.
Absolutely. And so, what is happening in spaces like this for LGBTQ folks is what's going to be in industry, which is going to show up in academia, which is going to show up in all of these other spaces. So, if we have folks who care and are responsive in these spaces to what is going on and actually understand what is going on, that's how the queer youth in a small town that doesn't have a Mary Lou Pearl in it understand how to show up and be themselves and be authentic and trust their own lived experience in this world. So it was an amazing time, and I'm grateful that B Labs allowed us to be in the space, that our work with our partner Chevron allowed us to take the research and the work that we've done in order to be in this space and say, how can we also be of service and how can we also help connect and grow the good work? So it was an amazing time, and Seattle is a beautiful place to be.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that. And I think like as I think about what that conference hoped to achieve, and I think did achieve, it's not so different from what I hope and many hope for the for queer youth also, which is to like highlight hope and possibility for folks in a moment that feels really challenging and show them a path of like where life can go. I think in many cases the stakes are much higher for queer youth because they lack often access to resources or support and don't have the agency or control over their own life yet to really get out of bad situations in the way that many adults do. But I think you're right. It's like good to think about how to translate this across a lot of different areas. Briefly, do you have maybe one other pearl that you'd want to share, offer from the time that we had?
I think my last pearl was just the ability. We were in a session that was led by, I believe her name is Sarah Warblow, who's over policy. And they were asking questions of us. And so we were doing round robins talking about different things. And one of the things I really love was a question that came up around, what is your organization doing in order to provide support for LGBTQ? What are you actively doing? And can that be translated in other spaces? And to sit in a table where you have Microsoft and you have Toyota, you have all these places that were like, this is what we're doing and this is what has worked, and people are sharing freely. That to me was probably the most inspirational because I didn't realize that these organizations internally were doing such good work. So that really was awesome to sit and hear what is happening in a way that didn't feel like it was closing off the ability for other people who may not be a part of the community to still shine and to provide their lived experience, especially when we don't always see that in media right now. It just seems like everyone is saying, no, we're not going to talk about this. But in fact, they're finding more efficient ways. I'll use that term, more efficient ways to reach more and more people.
Yeah, that's a very diplomatic way to say that. I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I think by design that it's not being broadcast, so, like, being like, "Oh, the work is actually still happening, they're just not talking about it, and their social media teams are amplifying it," was really helpful. I had a similar experience, and I was, like, furiously on my phone writing down those people's names and being like, "God, I'd love to work with them, I'd love to work with them." I think I felt similarly, and it was, I think, more of a unique experience to be, like, consultant, individual practitioner there with all these company corporate folks, having also been on that side in the past and done this work in the ERGs at Google in the past, it was interesting for me to have had that perspective, but now be on the outside and like sharing what I was seeing across a lot of organizations, which was really interesting. I would say the last thing I would offer, the last pearl for me, which I think is just good advice in general, but really resonated with me was that the way that we approach conversations around conflict, difference of opinion, all of that, our approach and the way that we open that engagement has a huge impact on whether those conversations are successful or not. And that when we can approach with compassion and curiosity, folks who have a different perspective than us or maybe resistant to the work that we want to do or not see the value in it, there's an opportunity for learning and growth there. Where if we come at it with preconceived ideas, a narrative that we've written in our brain about that person's perspective or where they're coming from, it cannot go well and sometimes jeopardize our opportunity to keep doing the work. Um, I pause a little bit because I also don't want the message here to be like, we have to ascribe to a certain respectability politic of the way that we communicate with people and always take the hit ourselves and gloss over our frustrations. There's a delicate balance to strike, right? And a lot of this is very personal and hurtful, and people need to hear clearly the impact of it. But I think when we are able to come in with a more level view, and again, this goes to all the way from speaking to your executive sponsor and your employee resource group to talking to your uncle who you might not agree with about a certain policy or political thing happening, that we've lost a lot of good examples of folks reaching across difference and having productive conversations. But for us to continue to heal and to move forward and progress these things that we care about, we do need allies and other people to be engaged and involved in the work. And the reality is sometimes we do have to do more of the emotional labor and work to reach not 50-50, but maybe we reach 75 to their 25 until we can get them into the middle to meet us where we're at. And that's hard and hard to ask of people. But I think when we can, it really allows us, and I've seen in my own life, allowed me to encourage the people around me to grow and open their minds a bit. So that was a good reminder for me. It's a message that we often communicate in many of our trainings and our power of words sessions that we lead with organizations to remind me in my day-to-day life to do that as well. Listeners, thank you so much for joining us today. If there's any follow-up or questions that you have for us about the conference or insights or things that we talked about today, you can contact us through our website, theblabs.com. We are here and we'd love to chat with you and hear from you. And with that, we will say goodbye for you for now and have a great day. Take care, y'all.